The grand chandelier in the Carter mansion shimmered like 1,000 tiny suns, casting its golden glow over the sea of impeccably dressed guests. Crystal glasses clinked melodiously as waiters glided through the crowd, offering champagne to New York's elite. It was a night meant to celebrate power, prestige, and legacy, an evening where every word carried weight and every gesture spoke volumes about status. Ethan stood before the ornate mirror in his room, adjusting his black tie with trembling fingers. His reflection stared back at him, dark eyes heavy with worry, lips pressed into a thin line. The faint strains of classical music drifted up from the ballroom below, mingling with the murmur of polite conversation. He could feel the pressure mounting, pressing down on his chest like an invisible hand squeezing tighter with each passing second. Tonight wasn't just another social gathering, it was the moment Richard Carter, his father, would announce Ethan's future to the world and perhaps more importantly, to himself. Richard Carter was a man who lived by one unyielding creed: success was measured in dollars and titles. A former presidential advisor turned top-tier lawyer, he had built an empire of influence that stretched across courtrooms and boardrooms alike. To him, Harvard Law wasn't merely a school, it was a birthright, a continuation of the Carter dynasty's dominance. And Ethan was supposed to be the crown jewel of this empire, the heir who would carry the torch forward without question or hesitation. But Victoria Carter, Ethan's mother, was no less formidable. As the head of Carter Group, one of the largest financial conglomerates in the country, she wielded her authority with icy precision. Her voice, though soft when spoken, carried the sharpness of a blade. She envisioned Ethan as a perfect prodigy, a polished figurehead groomed for greatness. Art? That frivolous pursuit of colors and canvases? It was nothing more than a stain on the family name, a childish indulgence unfit for someone destined to lead. Downstairs, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Richard stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, his presence commanding silence from the assembled crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone dripping with pride, "tonight, I am pleased to share some wonderful news. My son, Ethan Carter, will be attending Harvard Law next year. This is not only a testament to his potential but also a promise of what lies ahead for our family. A future defined by excellence." Applause erupted, filling the hall with thunderous approval. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. Somewhere between Richard's first syllable and the final ovation, something inside him snapped. His heart pounded wildly against his ribs, drowning out the noise around him. Every step toward the podium felt like walking through quicksand, yet there was no turning back now. When he finally reached the microphone, his hands gripped its stand tightly, knuckles white. For a brief moment, all eyes were on him, the prodigal son standing beneath the glittering chandelier, ready to shatter the illusion everyone had so carefully constructed. "I'm not going to law school," Ethan declared, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. He set his champagne flute down with deliberate force, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent room. "I'm going to be an artist." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Richard's face flushed crimson, veins bulging along his temples as he slammed his glass onto the nearest table, shards scattering everywhere. "You'll ruin everything we've worked for," he roared, spittle flying from his mouth. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Our reputation? Your future?" Victoria remained seated, her expression unreadable except for the cold fury simmering in her gaze. When she finally spoke, her words sliced through the air like razors. "If you walk out that door tonight, don't expect a single penny from us ever again. You'll get nothing, not from me, not from your father, not from anyone. We're done with you." Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, meeting their stares with unwavering resolve. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving behind the opulence, the expectations, and the life he'd been born into. Hours later, under the dim glow of a street lamp, Ethan sat on a park bench, clutching a small suitcase. Rain began to fall, droplets mingling with the tears streaming down his cheeks. Above him, the sky stretched endlessly, dotted with stars that seemed impossibly distant. Pain and determination warred within him. But one thought burned brighter than the rest: if they wouldn't support him, then he proved them wrong, even if it cost him everything. The rain-soaked streets glistened under the dim orange glow of flickering streetlights. As Ethan dragged his suitcase along the cracked pavement, his shoes splashed through puddles, each step heavier than the last. He stopped in front of a narrow doorway tucked between a crumbling brick building and a shuttered convenience store. The faded sign above read "Room for Rent," its letters peeling like old paint. This was the closest thing to shelter he could afford. Inside, the apartment was even worse than he had imagined. The walls were damp with mold, their once white surface now marred by streaks of grime. The wooden floor groaned underfoot, threatening to collapse at any moment. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow light that did little to dispel the gloom. Ethan set down his suitcase and opened it slowly, revealing not clothes or toiletries, but a battered easel and a bundle of half-used paints. For a moment, he simply stared at them, his fingers tracing the edges of the canvas tucked inside. It was all he had left: his art, his dream, his identity. By day, Ethan worked as a waiter at a bustling cafe downtown. The uniform was stiff, the hours endless, and the tips meager. Customers came and went, their laughter and chatter filling the air, oblivious to the young man silently refilling their coffee cups. One afternoon, a well-dressed businessman glanced at the sketchpad Ethan had left on the counter during his break. With a sneer, the man remarked loud enough for others to hear, "What's this? Some amateur doodling? You really think drawing pictures will pay your bills?" Laughter erupted around him, sharp and cutting, leaving Ethan red-faced and humiliated. But he forced himself to smile politely, clearing the table without a word. Inside, though, the words stung far deeper than he cared to admit. At night, Ethan took to the streets, setting up a makeshift stand where he sold small sketches for whatever price passers-by were willing to offer. Most ignored him entirely, hurrying past as if he were invisible. Occasionally, someone would stop, glance briefly, and walk away shaking their head. On particularly bad days, he earned nothing at all. Once, a child tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing excitedly at one of his drawings. "Mommy, can we buy it?" she asked. Her mother scowled, pulling her away. "Don't waste your time on such nonsense," she snapped. When teaching art to neighborhood kids became another source of income, Ethan found fleeting solace in their wide-eyed enthusiasm. They called him Mr. Ethan and admired his work with genuine awe, blissfully unaware of how desperate his circumstances truly were. Yet even these moments of joy were fleeting. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, exhaustion weighed down his limbs. There were nights when he subsisted on nothing more than dry bread and tap water, rationing what little money he had left for rent. One stormy evening, the world outside seemed to mirror the turmoil within him. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howling like a wounded animal. Ethan sat hunched over his desk, staring at an unfinished painting. The colors swirled chaotically across the canvas, a reflection of his inner chaos. His landlord pounded on the door, demanding overdue payment. Ethan tried to explain, pleaded for more time, but the man was unmoved. "Either you pay tonight, or you're out," he barked before slamming the door shut. With no other option, Ethan grabbed his portfolio and stepped back into the tempest. The park bench felt cold and unforgiving beneath him, rain soaking through his thin jacket. Each gust of wind sent shivers coursing through his body. Yet he clutched the case containing his artwork tightly to his chest. Water dripped from his hair onto his cheeks, mingling with tears he refused to let fall. Despite everything, the hunger, the rejection, the loneliness, he couldn't bring himself to give up. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope remained alive. Weeks later, fueled by determination, Ethan completed what would become his most ambitious piece yet, Golden Prison. The painting depicted wealthy elites trapped within golden bars, their faces distorted by greed and despair. To Ethan, it symbolized everything wrong with the world he had left behind. Heart-pounding, he carried the canvas to Jason Black's prestigious gallery, the city's epicenter of contemporary art. Standing outside the slate glass doors, Ethan hesitated. He smoothed his rumpled shirt, adjusted his tie, and took a deep breath before stepping inside. The gallery was pristine, every surface polished to perfection. Art collectors mingled casually, sipping wine while discussing investments disguised as passion. Ethan approached the receptionist, who directed him to Jason himself. Jason Black was every bit as imposing as Ethan had imagined. Tall, impeccably dressed, with piercing blue eyes that scanned Ethan from head to toe. Without ceremony, Jason glanced at the painting, then smirked. "A rich kid playing artist, huh? Go back to law school, kid. This isn't for you." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides, nails digging into his palms. His jaw tightened, but he swallowed the anger rising in his throat. Instead, he nodded curtly, turned on his heel, and walked out. Outside, the city buzzed indifferently, unaware of the storm brewing within him. Jason's dismissal burned like acid, but it also ignited something else of fierce resolve. He wouldn't let anyone, not his parents, not society, not even Jason Black, dictate his future. The small gallery, where Ethan had hung Golden Prison, was a far cry from the polished, high-end spaces he had once dreamed of entering. Its walls were plain white, its floors scuffed with years of wear. Yet, despite its modest appearance, it carried an air of authenticity that mirrored Ethan's art. The painting stood out like a beacon amidst the other works, its bold colors and stark imagery impossible to ignore. In Golden Prison, Ethan had poured every ounce of frustration, anger, and disillusionment he felt toward the world his family represented. The golden bars symbolized wealth and privilege, trapping the elite within their own greed. Their distorted faces conveyed emptiness, while falling coins scattered around them hinted at the fleeting nature of material success. It was more than just a painting, it was a manifesto, a raw, unfiltered critique of society's obsession with power and money. On the second day of the exhibition, James Miller stepped into the gallery. Known for his sharp eye and incisive critiques, James was a towering figure in the art world. He moved slowly through the space, pausing briefly at each piece before finally stopping in front of Golden Prison. His brow furrowed as he leaned closer, studying every detail. Minutes passed, but he didn't move. Then, without warning, he pulled out his notebook and began scribbling furiously. Later that evening, James' review appeared online under the headline, Golden Prison, a masterpiece that speaks truth to power. In the article, he wrote, Ethan Carter's Golden Prison is not merely a painting, it is a mirror reflecting the hollow decadence of our modern elite. Through this work, Carter challenges us to question what we value most, humanity or materialism. This is not just art, it is a call to action. A voice for a generation disillusioned by false promises. Mark my words, Ethan Carter is a name you will hear again and soon. The response was instantaneous. Social media erupted with reactions. Art enthusiasts dissected James' review, sharing screenshots of the painting across platforms. Hashtags like Golden Prison and Art Revolution trended globally. Within hours, the tiny gallery became overwhelmed with visitors eager to see the painting that had sparked such fervor. Lines stretched down the block, people chatting excitedly about the meaning behind the artwork. Amidst the chaos, Lucas Reynolds arrived unnoticed. Unlike the flashy patrons who frequented upscale galleries, Lucas dressed simply a tailored navy blazer over dark jeans, his salt-and-pepper hair neatly combed back. But anyone familiar with the art scene would recognize him instantly. A billionaire collector known for supporting emerging artists, Lucas had built his reputation on spotting genius before the rest of the world caught on. Lucas wandered through the crowded gallery until he reached Golden Prison. He stood there for a long moment, his piercing gray eyes scanning the canvas intently. Finally, he turned to one of the gallery's staff and asked to speak with the artist. When Ethan heard someone wanted to meet him, his heart skipped a beat. He emerged from the storage room, wiping paint-streaked hands on his jeans. As he approached, Lucas extended a hand. "You must be Ethan," he said warmly. "I'm Lucas Reynolds. May I say, your work, it's extraordinary." Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. No one had ever spoken to him with such sincerity or respect. "Thank you," he managed, his voice trembling slightly. Lucas gestured toward a quiet corner. "Let's talk," he suggested. Once they were alone, he got straight to the point. "I'd like to purchase Golden Prison." "Name your price." Ethan froze, disbelief washing over him. I don't understand," he stammered. $200,000, Lucas said firmly. "Cash, wire transfer, whatever you prefer. But make no mistake, I want this piece." For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. The number echoed in his mind, too large to comprehend. His throat tightened and tears welled up in his eyes. All the nights spent shivering on park benches, all the mockery and rejection he had endured, it all for this moment. And now, here was someone willing to bet on him, to believe in his vision. Unable to hold back, Ethan buried his face in his hands and wept. Not out of sadness, but relief, joy, redemption. When he finally looked up, Lucas placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've earned this, Ethan. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As the transaction was finalized, Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in months, maybe even years, he allowed himself to dream not of survival, but of possibility. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Ethan's new apartment, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of stability. The small but cozy space was a far cry from the damp, crumbling room he had once called home. On the table lay a stack of newspapers, their headlines screaming his name, Ethan Carter, the voice of a generation. He sipped his coffee slowly, savoring the quiet before the storm he knew would inevitably come. And then it did. His phone buzzed on the counter, shattering the silence. Ethan glanced at the screen. His mother's name flashed brightly against the dark background. His stomach tightened as he hesitated, then finally answered. "Ethan, darling," Victoria's voice cooed, syrupy sweet and dripping with insincerity. "I've been following your success. You've always had such talent, and I'm so proud of you. Please, come home. We can put everything behind us. Let's start fresh." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. Her words were polished, rehearsed, a performance designed to reel him back into their orbit. He could almost picture her sitting in her lavish study, perfectly poised, every syllable calculated for maximum effect. Richard took over the call moments later, his tone authoritative yet falsely warm. "Son, we made mistakes, but you're still family. Come back, and we'll make sure you have everything you need to thrive. Your future is here with us." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. His mind raced, replaying years of rejection, humiliation, and betrayal. Then, without a word, he ended the call. Instead of responding directly, Ethan reached for a pen and scribbled a note on the back of a postcard. He attached a copy of the receipt from Golden Prison's sale to $100, zero in bold black ink, and sent it off to his parents. The message was simple but biting. "Thank you for kicking me out. If you hadn't, I wouldn't have earned this money." The response was swift and ruthless. Victoria wasted no time retaliating. Within days, tabloids were flooded with articles questioning Ethan's authenticity. Headlines screamed accusations: Ethan Carter, artist or fraud? Is this prodigal son riding on family fame? The media painted him as an opportunist, claiming his success was built on the Carter name rather than genuine talent. Anonymous sources undoubtedly planted by Victoria were quoted extensively, suggesting that Ethan had exploited his family's reputation to gain attention. Public opinion splintered. Some dismissed Ethan as a spoiled rich kid using art as a rebellion phase. Others, however, saw through the smokescreen. Social media erupted with debates. Hashtags like "Support Ethan Carter" trending alongside vitriolic attacks. Supporters pointed out the hypocrisy of a family that had disowned him, now trying to claim credit for his achievements. As the scandal unfolded, Ethan found himself at the center of a media firestorm. Reporters camped outside his apartment, cameras flashing incessantly. Strangers approached him on the street, some offering encouragement, others hurling insults. It was exhausting but also revealing. What shocked Ethan most was how quickly people began to see the truth about his family. Interviews resurfaced of Richard dodging questions about corruption scandals. Old photos of Victoria smiling beside disgraced financiers circulated online. The more the Carters tried to discredit Ethan, the more their own facade crumbled. In the midst of the chaos, Ethan focused on preparing for the biggest exhibition of his career. Titled Puppets of Power, the centerpiece of the show was a massive painting depicting Richard and Victoria as marionettes controlled by invisible strings. Their faces were grotesque caricatures, cold, hollow, and devoid of humanity. Around them, golden chains tangled into knots, symbolizing the prison of their own making. Every brushstroke fueled his resolve. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about exposing the truth. The grand hall of the art gallery buzzed with anticipation as guests streamed in. Their elegant attire and polished demeanor a stark contrast to the raw intensity of Ethan's work. The centerpiece of the exhibition, Puppets of Power, loomed large at the far end of the room, a towering canvas that demanded attention. Its depiction of Richard and Victoria as marionettes, their strings tangled in golden chains, was both haunting and mesmerizing. Their faces were grotesquely exaggerated, their eyes hollow and lifeless, as if stripped of all humanity. It was a masterpiece of critique, a visual scream against the manipulation and greed Ethan had witnessed his entire life. Ethan stood near the entrance, greeting visitors with a calm but guarded smile. He watched as people stopped before Puppets of Power, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock, then to quiet contemplation. Some whispered among themselves, while others simply stared, unable to look away. For Ethan, this moment was more than just an exhibition, it was validation, vindication, and defiance all rolled into one. Then, the atmosphere shifted. A hush fell over the crowd as Richard and Victoria Carter entered the gallery. They moved with practiced grace, their presence commanding yet brittle, like glass on the verge of shattering. Richard wore a tailored suit, his jaw clenched tightly, while Victoria draped herself in a sleek gown, her lips pressed into a thin line. They surveyed the room with icy disdain, their gazes lingering on Puppets of Power. When they finally approached it, their reactions were subtle but unmistakable. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her pearl necklace, and Richard's knuckles whitened around the champagne flute he held. Ignoring the murmurs around them, they made their way toward Ethan. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path between the Carters and their estranged son. As they drew closer, Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken, but he forced himself to remain composed. This was the confrontation he had been preparing for, not just with his art, but with his words. "You've gone too far," Richard growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family?" Victoria stepped forward, her tone dripping with venom. "This isn't art, it's slander. Take it down now, or we'll ensure your career ends tonight." The threat hung heavy in the air, but Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to face the audience, who had fallen silent, watching the scene unfold with bated breath. With deliberate steps, he ascended the small stage set up for speeches. Taking the microphone in hand, he paused for a moment, letting the tension build before speaking. "I'm not afraid anymore," Ethan began, his voice steady and clear, carrying across the room. "You don't control me. You haven't for a long time. I spent years trying to live up to your expectations, but I realized something: your approval wasn't worth losing myself. Puppets of Power isn't just about you two. It's about every person who's ever been trapped by someone else's greed, someone else's lies. And today, I'm breaking free. His words resonated deeply, drawing spontaneous applause from the crowd. People cheered, clapping so loudly that the sound echoed off the walls. Cameras flashed, capturing the historic moment as Ethan stood tall, unyielding under the weight of his parents' fury. Richard and Victoria exchanged a glance, their faces pale with rage and humiliation. For the first time, they looked not like powerful figures, but like fragile humans exposed for who they truly were. Without another word, they turned and walked out, their heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The doors slammed shut behind them, sealing their retreat and their loss. As the applause continued, Ethan lowered the microphone and took a deep breath. He felt lighter, as though a burden he hadn't fully acknowledged had finally lifted. Looking out at the sea of faces, he saw admiration, respect, and solidarity. In that moment, he knew he had won not just against his parents, but against every force that had tried to silence him. The aftermath of the exhibition was nothing short of seismic. Within days, investigative journalists began digging into the Carter family's past, uncovering a web of scandals that had long been buried under layers of wealth and influence. Allegations of financial fraud, political manipulation, and unethical business practices dominated headlines worldwide. Richard's once sterling reputation as a top-tier lawyer crumbled when documents surfaced proving his involvement in a high-profile corruption case. Victoria's empire followed suit, her conglomerate exposed for exploiting loopholes to evade taxes and silence whistleblowers. Public opinion turned sharply against them. Once revered as pillars of society, the Carters were now vilified as symbols of greed and hypocrisy. Social media exploded with hashtags like Carter Exposed and Justice for Ethan, with users sharing stories of how the family had crushed dissent and exploited others for personal gain. What struck Ethan most, however, was the revelation that resonated deeply with the public. The Carters had never truly cared about him. Interviews with former employees, distant relatives, and even childhood acquaintances painted a picture of a cold, calculating family who saw their son not as a person, but as an asset, a tool to maintain their legacy. As the dust settled on the Carter scandal, Ethan found himself at peace. He no longer harbored anger or resentment toward his parents. Instead, he felt only pity for their inability to see beyond their own ambitions. Their downfall wasn't his victory, it was merely the inevitable consequence of living a life built on lies. With the proceeds from Golden Prison and subsequent sales of his work, Ethan founded the Carter Art Institute, a sanctuary for young artists seeking freedom from societal constraints. Located in a converted warehouse in downtown New York, the institute quickly became a beacon of creativity and innovation. Its walls were adorned with murals created by students, its halls alive with the hum of collaboration. Ethan taught classes himself, emphasizing not just technique but also the importance of staying true to one's vision. Art isn't about pleasing others, he often said. It's about telling your truth. Word spread rapidly about the Institute's unconventional approach, drawing aspiring artists from all walks of life. Many came from backgrounds similar to Ethan's: children of privilege who yearned to break free, or underprivileged youth desperate for a chance to express themselves. To them, Ethan was more than a mentor. He was proof that it was possible to defy expectations and carve out a path of one's own making. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in hues of orange and gold, Ethan stepped onto the balcony of his modest apartment overlooking the bustling streets below. Below him, crowds gathered outside the institute, laughing and admiring the latest student exhibition. The air buzzed with energy, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence of the mansion where he had grown up. Leaning against the railing, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the nights spent shivering on park benches, the rejection, the triumphs, and realized how far he had come. His eyes scanned the skyline, taking in the beauty of the fading light. For the first time in his life, he felt truly free. Turning back to face the crowd, Ethan smiled softly, his heart swelling with pride. These young artists were the future not just of art, but of a world unafraid to challenge the status quo. They reminded him of himself, full of passion and potential, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Ethan whispered to himself a phrase that had become his mantra: "Don't let anyone decide your life for you, especially those who think they own you." The night stretched on, vibrant and alive, mirroring the boundless possibilities ahead. Ethan knew his journey was far from over, but for now, he was content. The boy who had once been cast out had returned stronger, wiser, and unshakably determined to live on his own terms.